we've got a couple of things on the agenda today. It's going to be a little bit different. Most of our discussion today will be a discussion with a gentleman named Mark Miller, who started out life young, like most of us did, but like many of us did, as an athlete. And then he's going to tell us a little bit more about his story. I'm going to start off first, though, with just a very brief slide on some science that's coming up that's looking very interesting. It's a biological clock, aging clock, using inflammation to assess health and biological age versus chronological age. It's a new type of clock which takes health and inflammation into consideration. It can be higher or lower than a chronological age. The model can also be used to predict the risk of developing age-related disorders like cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases. Inflammation is treatable, and most of all, it's preventable. iAge could help doctors determine the interventions in order to extend the number of years a person lives in good health. You know, the whole thing is about living a healthy life instead of being disabled or obviously dying. The immune system is critical, not only for predicting unhealthy aging, but as a mechanism for driving unhealthy aging. We take friendly fire. That's the missing link that most docs are missing in terms of arterial age. It's our immune system attacking the plaque in our arteries. So a technology like this would allow us to measure inflammation with maybe even a blood test. Very practical for a clinical setting. iAge research is under the framework of the 1000 Immunomes Project at Stanford University in California. It aims to investigate how signatures of chronic systemic inflammation change as people age. CXCL9 cytokine is a promising inflammation marker. You remember the term cytokine, don't get intimidated by it. It's a 50-cent word. Break it down. Cyto meaning cell and kine meaning attractant. So it's a cell attractant in the immune system. Over 1,000 blood samples have been collected in this Stanford University project. People aged 8 to 96, they were analyzed. Participants with chronological ages and health information were incorporated into a machine learning algorithm in order to identify protein markers in blood that most clearly signal systemic inflammation. The immune signaling protein CXCL9 was pointed as a top contributor produced by the intima layer of blood vessels. You know what? Many of us could have told them where to look. We've been talking about intima for how many years? It was previously associated with the development of heart disease. Here's some promising results. The iAge model was tested on blood of 19 people who lived at least 99 years to calculate their biological age. On average, they had a biological age 40 years lower than their actual or chronological age. Also, it was observed that high levels of CXCL9, that protein cytokine, immune cytokine, drove the cells into a dysfunctional state. So when expression of the CXCL9 gene was silenced, the cells regained function, suggesting the protein's harmful effects might be reversible. And as we all know, as we all say over and over again, with heart attack being the #1 killer, heart attack and stroke being 2 of the top 3, you're only as old as your arteries. So speaking of arteries, let's get over to Mark's story. And just for those of you who are concerned, you know, this is not, Mark has done some work with us, but this is not really an advertisement. This is what we call a hero's journey. And if you go back and you haven't heard the term hero's journey, I'll give you a few slides to help you understand where we're going today. Long ago, in a land far away, heart attack, stroke, blindness, and kidney disease were disabling and killing our heroes' family, friends, and everyone else. Death and disability were inevitable. Most didn't escape their 70s, let alone make it to their 90s. Life was rarely good beyond 60 or 65. As we dig deeper, plaque inflammation and their insidious commander, IR, prediabetes, began to emerge as the culprits. There were small but growing bands of people leading a rebellion. Their goal was to extend and rectangularize their lifespan. In other words, don't go down the, a mini stroke here, a mini stroke there, starting to get 10 years of disability before you die. No, the rectangularization is remaining healthy into your 60s, 70s, and 80s. Their story's begun. We join them today. But before we do, let's talk about some other heroes' journeys that help us understand how difficult the challenge is that we're dealing with. We've talked many times about Big Russ, Tim Russert. He got up and ran like 5 days a week. He had some challenges. He went to see his doc, a good doc in Washington, D.C. The doc said, you know what, why don't we get you're looking okay. Why don't we get a stress test and see how you're looking? He was able to do fine on his stress test. And then 3 months later, he was taping a show. What is it? Face the Nation, Meet the Press, one of those where, anyhow, he didn't make it through that show. He was taping an on-ramp and collapsed, had a heart attack, died. They knew that he'd had plaque. Again, the question was what to do about it. And obviously Tim Russert's not alone. In fact, if you look at these folks, all of them have had heart attack, stroke, or other cardiovascular event. Most of them have died. So we don't want to go there. We don't want to learn that we have vascular problems by having a heart attack and a sudden death like Gandolfini and some of the others we're showing here. Now, so back to today's story. Again, it's a hero's journey, and we'll go back and talk for a minute about our hero. Let's put me and Mark on the screen here. So, Mark, you started off life as a young man, very interested in athletics. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. Like many young guys growing up in the 50s and 60s, that's what we did. After school, we went to school, came home, and then we started playing sports. Whatever the year, if it was fall, we'd play football in the yard, or we'd go to the school and play baseball, or whatever. And then pretty much that carried through little leagues when the age got appropriate. I think started at age 8, so it was around 3rd grade. Team sports. So that's what I knew, from a young age growing up, and was an athlete, and that's what my focus was. And then into high school, excuse me, go ahead.
You said Little League. Was this football?
It was football. So put on we played, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and my grade school was Old Orchard, and I played both baseball and football from that. Started in the 3rd grade. So that's when I started, formal sports, team sports. So it was good. It was a natural, and just continued on with it, through my high school and then into college. Focused, and got very serious about being the best I could be. In high school, training my body, had good leadership from coaching, and got myself extremely fit. And as I told you before, I wasn't an All-American or anything, but I didn't know the difference. So we just kept working hard and led our team, and it had a very positive experience. And likewise up into college. And then after college, into the business world, we'll kind of condense it, but met my wife and business constraints. And through the 30s, it wasn't bad because we still had we're coming off the, helmet got hung up, but we still worked out and stayed reasonably fit. Wife, a good cook, did put on some weight, but managed to, after around the 30s, get back to reasonably trim. But then business constraints, started my own business, and probably took better care of my automobile than I did my body. Weight got harder to put off, got bigger and bigger. Doctor said, well, you're probably pre-diabetic. Your A1C is borderline, and your fasting glucose is 95. Well, I was pre-diabetic for 20 plus years, until that magical day on September 14th, 2004, when in the morning I woke up with a huge pressure grabbing in the middle of my chest and couldn't get much air in. So I said, whoa, I knew something was wrong at that time. So it subsided and went away, and I said, okay. So hopped in the shower and got ready, and then it reoccurred, and I said, this is serious. I've never felt anything quite like that before. So I said, I even considered maybe I should call 911. And they go, oh, no, real men don't call 911. They hop in their car and drive themselves to the nearest emergency room, which is what I did.
Wow. Can we stop for a second?
So hopped the car, started. You were smiling, but this is a true story, and it's in retrospect, it's not funny. I shouldn't have done what I did. So, but it's as I started driving, I decided I'm going to the hospital. It subsided again. Oh, I felt better. So I kept the route going. I go, whatever happened 20 minutes before, I never felt before. So I'm continuing on, driving at a normal speed. And then it started to tighten again. And I go, uh-oh. So I don't know if it was 80 or 90 or what the top speed was on the freeway getting off to the hospital. But my plan was then I'm going to get off, drive right to the emergency door and slam the brakes on and jump out and run in. So fortunately, it went away by the time I didn't have to do all that, a bat exit in the emergency room, because it subsided again. So I did like any good American man would do. He parked the car, and I debated whether or not to go in. For maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Well, it doesn't hurt. So do I really want to go in? Do it? Well, anyway, long story short, I finally went in, and I told them I had chest pain. They looked at me, I was overweight, and the nurse put me in a wheelchair, immediately took me right back, and blood pressures and all that. Anyway, long story short, about 5 or 6 hours later, maybe not even that long, I was in the cath lab upstairs, and they were opening up my 99.9% occluded right coronary artery. So anyway, that's got everybody up to speed with the ex-athlete who let himself get out of shape and had a real big warning. But fortunately, no damage, no infarct, if you will, just right on the verge of it. So okay.
I would underline several things. Number one, fortunate, extremely fortunate. I saw a patient just yesterday who was in his very early 50s when he had his first event. And after that first event, he lost a major chunk of his heart muscle, and his ejection fraction went all the way down to 30%. Normal ejection fraction is double that and higher. So, that's the ejection fraction is the amount, if this were your ventricle, the business part, the big part of your heart that pumps to the rest of your body, it's the amount of blood after it squeezes, after it pumps, compared to the amount of total when it's filled. And so he had major loss of muscle and therefore function. You were very fortunate to not have.
Yes, I am, and I know I'm very blessed that way.
Let's talk about denial for just a second. Denial is one of those touchy-feely psychological words, and people talk about old guys like you and me, and that macho perspective, and you sitting there, you'd had enough ability to overcome that denial and drive yourself into the hospital, but then you stop before you get out of the car and you say, dude, this is going to be embarrassing. This is going to take my whole day up. I have no idea how much my copays are going to be. Maybe this is indigestion. You're sitting there going through all that in your head. And guess what? You very well could have gone right into VFib, totally out.
And never got out of the car.
Yeah.
Under my own power, right?
So it's a touchy-feely issue, this thing about denial, but it can have some very, very concrete effects.
Right. So to everyone who might be out there that's pay attention and listen to your body, and hopefully don't pay more attention sooner than I did to have to get to that point where there's the huge squeeze. But obviously, especially ex-jocks, you can't out-tough a clogged artery. You can't out-tough it. This is the way it is.
I have to interject with a personal story. You talked about the Friday Night Lights. I grew up in South Carolina, so if maybe some people have seen that series. It was an award-winning series about a small town in Texas where everything is about Friday night high school football.
That's it.
Unlike you, I was not exactly a natural in the football world. I was small and slow. I was on a small team. We called ourselves the Dirty Dozen and a Half. So we had 18 people on the whole squad. I'm 5'10", about 160 right now. I was 5'10" and about 115 at that point. Ooh. I was guess which positions I played?
Well, you had to be, if they had split ends, and you had to be out wide and then a safety deep.
Yeah, that's what you would think.
Oh, no, you are a guard.
I was the center on offense and nose guard on defense.
Oh, you're right in the middle. Yeah, with all that mass.
And my last game, it was against our arch rivals, and when I went up to hike the ball when we were on offense, I looked up at their nose guard, their middle center, and he looked big, and I thought, you know what? He's heavy. I'll be able to get under him. I was actually not that bad. It was deceptive, but I'd get under and really push hard. I got under him, hit him, and I remember I just went flat back onto my butt in the grass. The guy, I found out later, he was a bodybuilder, weightlifter, and he weighed 250 pounds. So
he was more than double your size and triple your the power. Right? Wasn't fair.
And that was the coup de grace on my football career. Anyway, so let's talk about your that diabetes or prediabetes. You mentioned that. First of all, let's clarify this. Did you ever have a diagnosis of full-blown diabetes?
Never. No,
and this is just so classic in terms of what we talk about in this channel. people will sometimes hear from their doc, oh, you've got a little bit of sugar. They interpret it as, oh, okay, I'll maybe not have a tablespoon, I have a teaspoon of sugar in my coffee, and continue to eat pastas, continue to eat breads, all that stuff, and not really worry about it. And here's the other thing that people don't get. It can start very young. I typically will see people that will have evidence that there's been a decade or two of prediabetes. I know that I had it for a couple of decades before it really became clear to me what was going on. Now, when did you first have any inkling that you had a blood sugar problem?
Well, subsequent to that stent, then I went through cardiac rehab, started paying a little closer attention, and that's when they said, "Well, you're pre-diabetic. You need to lose weight. The A1C, like 5.8 maybe at that time, and the fasting sugar was under 100, the traditional prescription, more exercise, low-fat diet, lose weight." So, tried to go under that, and that was in 2004. The first one and tried to do that, and maybe gained or kept the weight about neutral, but then found myself back in a catheter lab after, stress. I got into the stress test. Whoa, you need to, cath the stent. So I've had from the first one, September of 2004, I've had 3 other visits to the cath lab. So it wasn't just a one event deal, and the last one being in 2017. So trying to each time, you have the metabolic syndrome, you're pre-diabetes, you've got to try to lose, and I've been to, we won't name names, but the most prestigious heart hospital in this country, underneath the care of finest cardiologist staff, okay, and no emphasis is well, you need to lose weight and you got to get that weight off, but nothing about insulin resistance. And another stent with, I went through another round of cardiac rehab too, and they still do the old orthodox low-fat diet, so very frustrated up until I found a new pathway or a new roadmap last December on YouTube with a guy that said that it's impossible to reverse coronary arterial plaque. Or is it? I did. So, and then, so then I talked to Michelle, who in your office, and I signed up, and we had our first meeting on January 7th after I got my initial draw of blood work after it was between Christmas and New Year's. So that's January 7th of this year is one of those milestone dates in my life when you said, now you're sitting down, and I was, because we were, on a YouTube or a Zoom call, if you will. You said, "Mark, you have full-blown diabetes." And I wasn't shocked. I knew something was very, very, very wrong because I kept getting bigger and, couldn't I was not making any positive gains with my weight or my fitness level, although I was trying. So I was very frustrated. I wasn't going to give up, but didn't know what to do. So fortunately, I clicked on the PrevMed station, and we're underneath a good path now.
So you're one of those guys that that's very, very common. You hear the statement, "Well, my brother-in-law Mark caught diabetes when he was in the hospital for a heart attack," or something similar. In your case, pre-diabetes.
Pre-diabetes, that was the mantra. Let's say, well, I go on pre-diabetes, I'll just work out a little harder, and I'll try to eat that little extra. And, well, it was it wasn't success. Well, when you continue to return to the cath lab 3 more times from the initial time, something isn't working out right here.
Yeah.
It's not that I have a thick skull, but it's not all the way solid through. So knew I had to do something else. And fortunately, we found a new path.
Well, you did get a little bit better care. You didn't name the hospital. I won't name the hospitals either, but two of the guys I saw last week, new patients, one from Spain, one from New York and Chicago. Both of them had full-blown heart attacks. Both of them had been in the hospital, multiple hospitals, multiple times. And here's the thing. Both of them had docs that were saying, okay, we got to manage this LDL. And one of them, the docs had put him on the PCSK9 inhibitors, the high-tech drugs that just trump on LDL. Meanwhile, both of them had diabetes, full-blown diabetes. Neither one of them had been told they even had prediabetes from their doc. And it's really weird when you look at it from my perspective as a doc. I grew up, I trained with these people, and docs know diabetes causes heart attacks. They know it. However, what they don't seem to get is, number one, I need to be looking for it. And number two, how to look for it. So at least you had some warning that there was something going on with that diagnosis of at least prediabetes.
Right. And that's why I said, I needed to do another, because they've been, my doc had retired and I got assigned a new doctor and got all these nice letters. Mark, you got to come back. It's time to hop up on the treadmill again. And you need to, refresh and meet your new doctor. And I go, yeah, wrong direction. And and now, I'm getting, a little older. I go, unless I do something differently, I'm not going to be able to play golf with my grandchildren who are yet to be conceived. So I've got to have, a very fit lot of years ahead of me. So I wasn't going to be able to achieve that. So again, we're on the path. And with our first meeting, when, the key to me was my fasting insulin, or to you, Mark, your fasting insulin's 25, should be 6 or lower. So I was 4 times or 5 times higher of what it should be. And that was probably keeping me in the pre-diabetes condition with the other with the fasting glucose and the A1C, pumping out all that, which, made me resistant to it. So I was just on an incredibly wrong path. So, but it got righted. And it's amazing to me in that our first meeting, that okay, I'll accept I've got diabetes and I'm going to just, like the ex-athlete, you're never an ex-athlete, you're an athlete. I said, I'm going to put everything I have into beating this thing, reversing it, changing it, and get myself on a road to health. And I did that from it was January 7th at 3:30 in the afternoon. I was intermittent fasting that day, so I hadn't had the intake, and I immediately went on a very, very, very low carbohydrate program. So, in tremendous results in 6 weeks. We did labs again, and we knocked that fasting insulin down to, I think it went down to under 10 from 25 in 6 weeks, like getting the carbs.
So if you go back and we compare you to Luke Skywalker in terms of your own hero's journey,
okay,
you were having impact on your life and your life with your family. I mean, you were looking at, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do stuff with my grandkids at this point.
Right. Exactly.
You had found a couple of things. You were trying to lose weight. But it's like the evil empire of hyperglycemia was just attacking you, and you didn't know it. You weren't aware. You came to see me. We found that out. So I was your what's the guy's name? The Yoda. I talk about as well as Yoda, but at least I was able to say, look, full-blown diabetes you have, my friend.
Mhm.
We
Just like the
challenged your
book.
blood sugar. It came back over 200. You're fasting. You were keeping your blood sugars down. So that was what was throwing you and your doctors off about, well, he's not that bad off. Well, it was taking you a blood level of 25 to do that. So that's where people were missing the boat. They weren't measuring the fasting insulin. They weren't doing a challenge on your insulin. So, or a challenge on your
No,
insulin.
I never had a challenge to the insulin. No, till us.
Right. So then you found out, okay, well, I've got full-blown diabetes. Then at that point you said, okay, carbs are not my friend.
No, carbs
I've
are my
got,
enemy.
yeah. And they've been doing me significant damage, and they almost killed me. So
Well,
I'm going to start slowing down on the carbs. You went very low carb. Tell us a little bit more about what else you did, what that was like.
well,
You get that keto flu?
well, that one I may have got that a little bit, but it didn't last long, a week or two. Just not feeling off, if you will.
Yeah.
But it was, again, we needed to stick with the program, and it's amazing, when you start looking at labels and then, sugar is everywhere that it hides, and carb content, and to consume daily under 10 carbs, it takes, you need to make sure you're watching what you're doing. So, we did that and made sure that we increased our healthy fats. Walnuts and pecans and macadamia nuts are now my friends versus Triscuits loaded with peanut butter and barbecue chips and a lot of other things that were, a carboholic dream. But my personal, nemesis. What's plural for nemesis? At any rate, so we've watched that. Salmon is good. We've reversed. Instead of having mostly carbs, we have very, very few carbs at the top. Very moderate amount of proteins, and the healthy fats are the basis of my intake. Since January 7th. Now, and intermittent fasting as well. That's a big thing. That helps as well.
So, did you lose weight during this experience?
I've lost weight. I have lost in excess of half a hundred, maybe 53, 54.
54
So,
pounds.
yeah. And I about 3 weeks ago, I kept, back when the last time I was fit and working out, it was 1980, well, so that's what? That's 40 years ago. I put on some workout talks from 1980 and had Mrs. Miller take a picture, so I could get in them. And that was after, not quite. Since that picture 3 weeks ago, I'm down about another 7 or 8. So
wow.
But yeah, and then Mrs. Miller is a value shopper, and she was at Marshall's yesterday that sells kind of closeout things. So she came back with a pair of work pants, Perry Ellis brand, and I'm proud to say this: size 32, extra slim fit.
Whoa!
And I'm going to wear them to work tomorrow. So now they're a little snug, but when a 32 extra slim fit, when not even 7 months ago, where it was nothing but a dream far, far away in a galaxy far, far away. It's fantastic. Oh yeah. So it's all good, and then also with the weight loss, the level of my fitness has increased, and I've been working out with walking and power walking, and as we had in our last review, we're going to add resistance training, and we've started just with form. We're not even with the bar yet for it. I'm just doing almost like Tai Chi deadlifts with no weight, working on my form. and with squats, working on form. And I'm 2 weeks into that. So we're going to stick with that for increase the reps before we put a bar on. So
that's the way to do it. You know, so many people ask me about, and I get it. You know, you see so much on the internet about really just going down to about 4 or 5 reps sometimes and just doing as hard as you can.
Right.
I get that. I understand that. There's a place for that, but it's not where you are.
No, not
where most of us are when we go back and just start with the resistance training again when we haven't been doing it.
Right, for a long time. Right. Yeah, I am not going to petition the NCAA for another year of eligibility. So I'm not going to do it. I can do it. Not going to do it. So I don't need to do. Well, I want to hit the golf ball a little farther. I want to just be strong and fit and just live an extremely active, another 25, 30 years or whatever the good Lord lets me, have on this earth. So that, that's the way forward. So it's we're enthused. And when you asked our last meeting, how you doing, Mark? I said, Doc, I'm thriving. And truly I am. I am thriving. I'm strong. I'm fit. Looking forward to the rest of the day today and tomorrow because it's going to be better than today. So, and I'm no different than a lot of other ex-jocks that did it and was competitive and did that. So, again, not petitioning. I'm not going to put on a helmet again. I'm not going to play another down. But we want to be, competitive, the rest of the way on this earth and in life. So that's the goal. And we're doing the things we need to do both metabolically and physically too to do that. So it can be done.
In terms of exercise, you did mention starting slowly to get into some resistance training, which do you mind sharing with us how old you are?
I am 68 and a half. I'll be 69 February 7th.
I am 64. I didn't used to do a whole lot of resistance training, and I've really started cranking it up the past year because as we get into our mid 60s, you see the evidence all over the place. More and more of us start getting insulin resistance, more and more of us start getting inflammation, and more of us lose muscle mass. So you also mentioned squats. When we talk about resistance training with men, they always start thinking about their guns and, I'm going to make big muscles here. These are tiny muscles. Even if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, you look at him, he's got really big muscles here, but compare that to his thighs. His thighs, our thighs, are big muscle masses that really drive our metabolism. And the type of metabolism that we're trying to drive here is this. As we age, our insulin receptors lose response. So just like yours, mine do the same thing. They don't respond to insulin quite as well. Well, a large muscle mass totally bypasses an insulin receptor. I mean, if you were to go out, if you were to say, you know what, I'm going to take a little carb vacation. I'll have a slice of pizza, or I'm at a grandchild's birthday party and they really want me to have a piece of cake. I have a tiny piece of cake. I go out walking and that just takes the top right off of that spike because you've got those large muscles working and they're bypassing those resistant insulin receptors. So that's a critical piece right now. Yeah. Now, what do you aerobics is important though. Do you do any kind of aerobics like light walking, stuff like that?
Yeah, walking, power walking, and I almost do. I've also there's a executive golf course, part 3 par 4s and 6 par 3s that I put my sticks on my back, and that's almost I almost make that play 3 balls, and I'm not jogging, but I'm walking very, very fast with the clubs on my back. So that becomes an anaerobic event too. And I'm doing that a couple times a week, combined with my regular golf and outings. So yeah, we're getting that. Yeah, I'm not running used to be, back in the competitive days, a form of punishment if you did not do something properly. Don't laugh, it was. You get over, hit the trick well. So I still equate that. So we will, because we have a lot less body mass to move now and on the joints, we can with power walk, no problem, but we've a couple times for 25 to 50 yards went into I'm not going to say a sprint, but we will say a full gallop.
So you bring up a good point. High intensity intervals are a big deal for us, no matter what age, no matter what level of function. I've got a lot of folks that don't do any kind of walking. We get them just starting at least with some mall walking, and then start to get them where they can start breathing heavy, start getting into more of a high intensity interval. So it sounds like, so am I hearing you correctly? Your version of high intensity interval right now is golfing, carrying that those drugs on your back,
trotting, but going very quickly. Right, it is because it causes me to breathe.
Very good.
So
you know, you made a statement a minute ago, and I just wanted to repeat that.
Okay.
You said something about, you know what? I'm on the other end. I've been through all that. I've been through that heart attack or that event. And I've been through looking at, you know what? I don't think I'll be able to play golf with my grandkids. And I'm on the other side of that. I'm actually fully planning, expecting to make it into my 90s. I got a couple more stuff I want to do. So
yeah, I'm planning on shooting in the 80s when I'm 90. That's my goal.
There you go.
Break 90 when I'm 90.
And I can tell you, as a doc who studies this, I have every expectation too. Here's the most likely issue, and here's at this point in time, I see a lot of folks that have made it through that hero's journey that you just described. The biggest risk at this point is falling off the wagon. Because this is not a sprint. I used to, you know, given the way I'm built, I wasn't built for football. I was built for running, and I've run several marathons. I actually even sort of ran, walk, and ultra marathon. But this is, you know, a marathon. My marathon time was 3.5 hours. I'm not a speed demon, but you know that's acceptable. The ultra marathon, what was that? 40 miles. That took me an embarrassingly long time. I'm not even going to say.
But you went 40 miles. That, you know, you're looking at, well, it's so slow, but it was 40 miles.
But here's the thing, you know, we like to use the analogy. We like to say that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Right.
Even an ultra marathon is less than a day of running. And this is day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. And it can be a challenge.
Well, there's no doubt, but knowing where I was and the feeling of, you know, I'm not saying I feel like I'm 25 years old again, but I feel like a much, much, much younger man. So and you know what? Where I may have been addicted to those Triscuits with the peanut butter, I'm addicted to the way I'm feeling, and it can happen to everybody out there if you put in the work, make the commitment, and you can. You know, we're not getting younger; we're limited by our biology and father time, but it can be. You know, there's no reason that we cannot thrive into our 80s and beyond.
I agree. I will hold my hand up and say I'm guilty on that last piece in terms of somewhat, struggling a little bit right now. And here's my struggle. Yeah, you mentioned getting down to 32. Yeah. Even though I was small, I never really got below a size 33 pants until I was 61 years old. Then I got down to 32 for a couple of years. Here's what happened. Over the past, like I mentioned, over the past 2 years, I started cranking up the resistance training.
Right.
When I do that, I get hungry. it really cranks on my appetite. So I've porked back up. I'm back up in the 160s now from from the low 150s. I've got a lot more muscle, but I've got a little bit more belly too. So, it's always a challenge.
Well, more lean muscle mass, and so it isn't all totally parked up. So you've bulked up a little bit. So there's some good muscle mass that you've been building. But so it's that silly waistline, but it is key. But well, you're metabolically all good and all that, right? So it's not, yeah. So you're fine.
So anything else to share with the group before we go into response to some of the comments and questions?
Okay. My journey is not that one of, I don't consider myself a hero, but the comparison to fighting a battle and a big enemy, an overwhelming enemy, I'm with that. And my message to anybody, especially all you ex-athletes, guys, you can do it. You can do it. You can pick back up no matter how long it's been or where you are metabolically. You can change and you can improve and you can thrive the rest of your life. So I guess that's the message, the end of the message I wanted to make sure everybody heard today.
Thank you so much, Mark. I learned most of what I've learned from my patients, and I keep forgetting that, it's one thing to hear some old academic doc up spouting a bunch of technical stuff. It's a very different thing to hear somebody else who's struggling right now with the stuff that I'm struggling with, that you're struggling with.
Sure.
Describing, I don't do this medicine stuff for a living. I did other stuff for a living. It was complicated, but you know what? And I had some challenges. I was worried about my own life, my health, my family. But you can get beyond that. Yeah. I had some failures. Okay. So you know what? I tried a low fat diet. I tried this, I tried that. I ended up, failing, but you can still get beyond it. I really appreciate you sharing that story, Mark.
Well, my pleasure. It's been my pleasure, Ryan.
So, Gilbert, if you'll give us the water ball, we'll go into a little bit of Q&A. So, Millard Woods, good morning. Roller Girl, good morning. Spanky, good morning from Brentwood. Is that Brentwood, Tennessee? That's where I used to live. Oh, Millard, yeah, okay. So Millard like Willard. Very good, thank you. At least I didn't say Millard like Willard. Martha Reich, James's Aunt Martha. Good to see you today. Roller Girl, born in 65, I'm 56. Thanks for joining us. Bart Robinson was out skipping rope this morning, doing burpees. And our book arrived on his doorstep. Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much, Bart. The book's out there. Again, as the author, I can say this. Don't plan on sitting down and reading the whole thing. It's just, it's sort of like the way I talk, a little bit dry and boring in a lot of places. The intro and the first chapter are, you can read through it, you can make it through that, but the best way to use that book is to go back and start using it sort of like a reference. If your doc does a cardiovascular risk estimate, then go back and look up the chapter on Framingham, and you'll see exactly what was going on in your doctor's mind. Including, you'll find out some of the dirty little secrets about Framingham that your doctor may not know. So that's the way to use that book. Also, it goes into a lot of detail on stress tests, for example. It's like, and here's what the title of the book is: Prevention Myths. why a cardiovascular stress test cannot predict your heart attack and which tests can. So that's what this is all about. It goes into the sort of stuff that Mark has experienced. So many of us have experienced and found out, you know what, that's not a good place to be. We don't want to be there. We want to do the stuff that keeps us out of that kind of environment. So this gives you, again, all of the inside research, inside detail, which, again, your docs just don't understand. 1957, Cato, good morning. Roller Girl, good morning. Great name. Thank you. Lucky man to survive what you survived, Mark, as we discussed. Adding to inflammation markers, EF should be checked at least once a year, ejection fraction. Go ahead. I see you making a face. You want to make a comment to that, Mark?
Well, what does it, I'm not sure that by the time that thing is not, you're later on, there's already a lot of negative things happening before that.
Exactly.
Going down. I think there's other markers would probably be more important to stay tuned before that ejection fraction.
Exactly. So if you're doing well, if you're not having events, you're not likely to have a need to test ejection fraction, especially on a regular basis. For anybody that comes to me that has had a heart attack, that's lost some muscle, yes, we'll be checking that. You do that through a ultrasound technology. It's similar to the technology that you use to measure plaque itself in the artery walls, but a very, very different environment, different setup, different tests, different analytics. So yes, if somebody's had a problem, we'll recommend getting that. But if if they're like you, Mark, I wouldn't. Now, the other thing I would say, back to one of the patients I mentioned earlier, even though that patient went down into his 30s, 30% ejection fraction in his 50s after that heart attack, he's up in his 50s now. So he went from 30s up to 50% ejection fraction. And that happens. People think, well, isn't that permanent damage? Well, there may be permanent damage to some muscle, but you start getting, you can get improvements. Let me just leave it at that without getting too detailed. Technical. Roller Girl, love that show. I think she's talking about Friday Night Lights. Have the video series. Yep. ET himself. Hi, wee bit late. So we got a lot of conversation going on today. I know I saw a couple of questions about, okay, so yeah, I saw this one. Bill Boswell, Dr. Brewer, can nicotinic acid or niacin remove the pus material from pustules or pimples you mentioned in regards to, it's Tim Russert's, not Rem Russert, Tim Russert's autopsy. So just to remind those of you that aren't keyed in on what Bill's talking about, when Tim Russert had his heart attack, went to the ER, they did go ahead and do an autopsy. He had just flown back from a celebration in Italy. His son had, I think, had gotten into college or was graduating from college or something. So they were celebrating. But he flew back to tape the show for that week. And so because he was in an airplane for several hours the day before this happened, there was obviously also some suspicion that maybe he developed a blood clot in his legs from sitting. And that was one of the key things they were looking for. And no, he had not developed a blood clot. So when they opened up his aorta and the arteries of his heart, the pathologist said, gosh, it looks like the face of a teenager that's got a really bad case of acne. And what he was describing was these pimples, these little pustules. If you're not keying on where we're going with that, we've had several videos over the past few weeks where we talk about inflammation in the artery wall. It's where something caused irritation and inflammation, and for most of it's exactly what Mark had. We have blood sugar levels or insulin levels that are too high for too long. Then LDL starts passing through the intima, that lining of our artery wall. That intima lining is what needs to be healthy. So if you remember, we talked about the cytokine today that they're measuring out of the intima. They're looking for the health of the intima as well on that inflammation clock, IH. So back to Tim Russert. So they just said, look, he's got so many of these little pustules, and they're releasing pus out into his arteries. That is the essence of a heart attack. Most people think that a heart attack is LDL piling up in the artery lumen, the inside where the blood flows, just like hair in a bathtub, stopping up a bathtub by stopping up the drain. That's not at all what's happening. What's happening is exactly what happened with Tim Russert. You start getting those plaques within the artery walls. Your immune system starts attacking those, liquefying them, trying to get that plaque out of there. That liquid is a pus, and that pus can get released into the artery. When it does, it's not the plaque. It's where that hot liquid plaque causes a clot. And if the clot's big enough and it goes to the heart, it's a heart attack. And that's exactly what killed Tim Russert. So the question is, I've gone down one bunny hole, but it really didn't answer your question, Bill. The question was, does niacin fix that? Niacin helps. Niacin is actually the only thing, prescription or non-prescription, that can decrease LDL, increase HDL, decrease triglycerides, have a lot of positive impacts. I'm not going to go into, I've got several videos on niacin. There's a whole bunch of story about that. A lot of docs don't use it anymore. I use it. I recommend people considering using it when they have specific issues. It helps with Lp(a). And yes, we've got some new things coming out for Lp(a), the antisense drugs, but they're not ready for prime time yet. End of the day, it helps. But does it just remove the pus? No, not really. Here's the biggest issue. I mean, it can help you, but here's the biggest issue, and it's what we see over and over and over again. And you saw it, you heard it in Mark's story today. He said, I had some early warning on an event that I had prediabetes. Well, fast forward, it turns out I had full-blown diabetes. The doctors just didn't know it. So meanwhile, for most of us, for years, even decades, it isn't so much that we need niacin to clean it up. Our body will clean up that inflammation. It'll clean up that problem. But we've got to quit adding fuel to the fire. And that's what's going on. You go back in, you eat the wrong foods, you have insulin resistance, your blood sugar stays 140, 160, 180, 220 hour after hour, and that causes more inflammation. So that's why you hear that over and over again. You can't out-supplement a lifestyle problem, just like you can't out-medicate it and you can't out-stint it. Any comments, Mark?
Well, just amen. You can't out-medicate it. You can't out-stunt it. It's there. And until we've addressed my core issue, all that inflammation wouldn't have changed. But amen to the addressing the root cause.
Thank you. Tired looking for name. Interesting name, which we told about the story a couple of times. To the $10 to the team. Thank you so much. That $10 actually makes a difference. Gilbert, who's on managing the program today while Mark and I talk, lives in the Philippines, and $10 goes a lot further in the Philippines than it does here. We passed over the past couple of months, less than half of our speaking of the U.S. and Philippines, as of a couple of months ago, less than half of our views are in the U.S. these days. It's all over the world, about 50, 60 different countries. Okay, Roller Girl, good work, sir. Great work, sir. Fort Worth West Side, I had a blood glucose of 38 at the 5th hour of my Kraft test. Could this have been due to delayed insulin response overcompensating to drop that value so low? Never blood glucose less than 80 before that test, usually 95 to 105. So here's the thing. You know, we used to talk about, 20 years ago and before in medicine, you used to hear the term reactive hypoglycemia. In other words, it's hypo, low, glyce meaning glucose, emia meaning in the blood, hypoglycemia, low blood glucose. And reactive meant reacting to something you ate. Now, as of 20 years ago, doctors started saying that's an old wives' tale, it's an urban myth. You know, what happened was that happened at about the time that most docs just quit using OGTT, oral glucose tolerance tests, insulin surveys. They stopped challenging the pancreas. So they really forgot some stuff that we knew 30 years ago. And you see that all the time, Fort Worth West Side. I really appreciate you sharing that. I see it a lot. And yes, your body can overreact. And quite often, that overreaction is starting to occur. That's one of the first things that we'll see. We know we see that in another endocrine area with thyroid. The most common cause of hypothyroid, or the most common problem with thyroid, is hypothyroid. It's very common. It's something that we tend to see as we get older, and causes some of the risk that we're talking about. The vast majority of that hypo, decreased thyroid, was preceded by hyper, increased thyroid. Same thing happens here. So thank you so much. I don't know if I was I telling you about this, Mark, where I had a patient, I had a call from the lab. They were doing one of these and they said, we've got a panic value. The 2-hour blood sugar was 23. And so I called that patient and she was fine. She said, oh yeah, I remember that going there for that test, but no, I didn't feel bad at all.
With 23?
23. You know, everybody tends to panic when you see this. The fact that she didn't feel it says one of two things. And I think there was probably a little bit of both. That may have been spuriously low, but as I found out a little bit more about her condition, I'm very comfortable that she was hitting routinely some very, very low blood sugars.
So it wasn't that abnormal for her. Correct.
Our body, we have a thing it's like a thermostat in our brain, and it right. starts to accommodate to what level of glucose values that we tend to run. As we get older and more insulin resistant, our blood sugars start, instead of tending to stay between 70 and 90, they start staying between 95 and 115 or 100 and 120, you know, higher and higher levels. For those of us who are just getting started on that journey and we're used to those higher levels, we go down to a 60 and we get hypoglycemic. We get symptomatic. We break out in a cold sweat. You get woozy. And I recorded a couple of those when I experienced them a couple of years ago. That lasted a few months. Since then, I've routinely gotten down into the 60s and even the 50s and really don't notice anything, just because you start getting used to not running so hot. I don't know if you've seen any of that. You've gone through a similar experience in terms of your blood sugars, Mark. Were you that in touch with this issue?
Well, early on, underneath the low carb, yeah, there were a couple occurrences that wasn't used to the lower blood sugar, and it did, with this weak, not so much diaphoretic, but just a real whoa. A couple times driving the car, one time had to pull over because woozy is probably a better word. So yeah, but that's that was when I say early on. We started January. That was maybe January, February. That subsided by March.
I'm glad to hear it, and you bring up a good point. This hypoglycemic episodes are nothing to be messed with, especially if you're operating machinery, and driving is the ultimate.
Obviously, yeah.
It can be very dangerous. Fort Worth West Side. Fortunately, I had some glucose to counterbalance that drop. So I'm guessing, Fort Worth, that you were symptomatic. Skunk Ape. Skunk loves to provide a little sarcasm and humor.
Okay.
And he said, I just started an all new all pickle diet. I hope it works. It's an interesting point. As often happens with Skunk Ape's humor, there are a couple of things there. Vinegar is actually, people talk about apple cider vinegar all the time, and that's what pickles are mostly made of. Maybe not apple cider vinegar, but vinegar. Vinegar can help in terms of glucose management. And you talk about, well, there's a lot of salt in pickles. The reality is, once you go on a keto and low carb diet, concerns about salt are much less of an issue. Fort Worth West Side. Can insulin receptors ever repair themselves, or are they like lost hearing due to damage? That's a great question. So here's the thing. I see people all the time who come in and they've had huge improvements. In fact, it really started throwing me for a loop the first few times I was seeing. It started happening when all my patients started coming in from the channel. I would see these folks with significant plaque. Then we'd do the glucose challenge, and it would look fine. And then I would find out, oh yeah, doc, I lost 50 pounds. So that's one of the things that happens. And that's one of the things that you and I can remember, Mark. What I recommend, if people want to, you lose just 10 pounds and you can get a significant change in that diabetes test that we talked about, the insulin survey, the OGTT with insulin response. So you might find, after all the weight loss that you've done, I bet that you find that you're a lot better off in terms of your insulin management than you were before. So if you want to repeat one now, I'm fine doing that. If you want to wait, I'm fine doing that as well. But you bring up a great point, Fort Worth, and it is with loss of body fat. We used to think that body fat was an inert energy storage tissue, but it's not. It is an endocrine tissue. It's very active, and it drives prediabetes, insulin resistance, diabetes. Now, for somebody like me who's relatively thin, not that much body fat, and there are a lot of us out there who, we're getting up in age. Our insulin receptors are losing their sensitivity. You can increase muscle mass, that helps, but that's still not really increasing insulin sensitivity on those receptors. It's just bypassing the receptors. So the one place where you can improve receptor activity is when they were getting a routine endocrine push from body fat. Oh, I'm not gonna go to that one, Skunk. I'm I'll just say this. I work, we're starting that project in Alabama, and I live at home, and there's a lot of Democrats where I live at home, and they complain about me going down working with all those Republicans and being a Republican. I go down to Alabama and do my work, and they complain about me being a bougie Democrat. And it's like, if anything, I'm more of a libertarian, but politics are just too ugly right now. Incline treadmill is a fantastic option. Mezzanine, you're exactly right. Incline treadmill is one of the best ways to get high intensity interval. For those of us who can do it, I've been in that space. I've seen several people who, especially lighter, thinner people like me, who were more of a distance runner, cranking up the resistance, the hill, the incline on that treadmill can make a huge difference. And it's making that difference in those calves, quads, strap muscles, hamstrings, hips, all of those muscles that provide big muscle mass to improve insulin management. Jonathan Hull, good morning, Dr. B. What's your opinion about risk calculators like the one for the American College of Cardiology? Do you use them to decide whether to prescribe statins? So, Jonathan, that's a great question. I mentioned that before. The ACC, American College of Cardiology, basically they're talking about the Framingham-based risk calculator. And Framingham is a town about an hour outside of Boston. They've had 5 different generations of studies of people in terms, especially focused on cardiovascular disease. The Framingham calculators came out of that. Now, I believe the last Framingham data, the last set of data used in Framingham or in the risk calculator was like data coming out of 2013. Here's the problem with that calculator. It doubles the risk of heart attack in a lot of people, especially women. So in other words, the risk that the cardiologist gets for women especially is twice the actual risk. And that's not just me saying that, some internet doc. I've got my credentials. I used to teach this at Johns Hopkins, but you go back, this is all over the internet. Some of, the guys at Hopkins, the guys at Mayo, they're doctors all over the academic areas that have said, yeah, Framingham has problems. So a couple of other points about Framingham. Number one, well, why does that matter? Well, because number one, that ends up with a lot of people getting stress tests that shouldn't have. And number two, it ends up with a lot of people getting put on statins that should not have been put on statins. So it creates problems. So then the next question is, well, why don't we just go back to previous data on for the calculators? The previous data is even worse. So Framingham is not bad. I use it, but unfortunately, I'm one of very few doctors that understands the problems with Framingham. It's a great question, Jonathan. You gave me a great opportunity to go down a bunny hole. Skunk Ape, no way I'm running unless someone's chasing me. Jonathan Hull, $9.99. Again, thank you so much for that super chat button. Skunk Ape says he hasn't run in 20 years. Now, we're getting a lot of comments right now. I try to get to all of them just to check, but I don't know whether we'll be able to or, okay. Wish my man would pay attention to this. Yep. You know what, Roller Girl? I love it when the wife comes to the meetings when the man is the patient, because this is all about lifestyle. And if Number one, as you can tell, I tend to go down these bunny holes, and 2 sets of ears is a lot better than one. Number two, the wife tends to have a huge impact on key lifestyle issues like, okay, are we getting out and walking? And most importantly, what are we eating? When are we eating? How much are we eating? Stuff like that. So I wish your man would get involved in this too. ET himself, damn good advice. Roller Girl, thank you, gentlemen. Bob Bell. Bob's very good. He studied a lot of this stuff. FWW, Google this. Dysfunction of persisting B cells is a key feature of early type 2 diabetes pathogenesis. So basically what he's talking about is the B cells in the pancreas that actually make insulin. We can probably, does low carb diet, Alan Turner, does low carb diet have an impact on LDL particle size? It really does. Now, some people never get beyond that. Let me just make a couple of comments. If you listen to Thomas Dayspring and some of the other world-class lipidologists, they'll make the point that a typical LDL value alone, or a typical cholesterol panel, which most doctors use, is maybe not entirely worthless. And I know that it's not worthless because I use triglyceride over HDL. But you really need to get what we call a fractionation. And most docs don't do that. They don't know to do that. And what we're looking at are things like particle sizes in the LDL family and the HDL family. One of the things that we see is that with low carb diet, you tend to have an improvement in that particle size. You go more towards the large fluffy LDLs, which is what we want, and away from the small, dense, inflammatory LDLs. Thank you, Alan. Great question. Alan, my guess would be absolutely. Study shows beta cell dysfunction that potentially could be improved with therapy, not loss of beta cell volume. Thank you so much, Bob. Great point. Kyle Brooker, can your body become accustomed to taking niacin at a 1,500 milligram daily dose? Is it safe to bump it up to 2,000? Well, actually, the docs that use niacin, most of them will say you really have to get to 2,000 before you start seeing these impacts. I can tell you from watching Lp(a) values, from watching cardiovascular inflammation panels, I've got plenty of people that are getting impact from niacin at lower levels, 500 milligrams, for example. Yes, 2,000 is a good number. I certainly would not argue with getting up to that, but I would argue with the statement that you'll often hear that it's got to be 2,000 before you get an impact. Niacin brought my Lp(a) down quite a bit. I first started taking it early this year. Brought my score down from 354 to 218. Currently, still in the high range though. Kyla, thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting and helpful information. Another thing I would say is that we tend to lose track of the fact that cardiovascular disease is a multi-risk problem, a multifactorial issue. So, yes, Lp(a) is an issue. Yes, FH or familial hypercholesterol is an issue. Thyroid problems can be an issue. Mark described his journey and battle against prediabetes and insulin resistance. That is by far the biggest issue. So we have to be working and aware of where we are with each of these risk factors and working on each of them. A55. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just clearing my throat. I wasn't good. I'm just listening. We're good.
Okay. S55B. Doc, are you still taking patients? I had a thalamic stroke a year and a half ago. We're slowing down in terms of patients because we're getting so many in terms of the Alabama project. But if you have an interest, you can call Michelle at 859-721-1414. That's 859-721-1414. And Gilbert, if you're able to find it, if you could put that number up thank you, very fast. Gilbert's good, isn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for all you do. Thank you for your interest. Last comment, I think, for the day. Asadul Islam, dear sir, can we do duplex Doppler instead of CIMT? Actually, you need to do the CIMT. Just looking at the, I think what you're asking is that there are a couple of types of programs for looking, when they do an ultrasound here, 300 out of 299 out of 300 of them will be doing what we call, some people call it a duplex. Basically what they're doing is they're looking at the turbulence of the flow. They're looking at the flow, and they're doing it similar to a carotid Doppler is what the correct term. Doppler's looking at a change in flow. And here's the assumption. If you've got a significant change in your flow, you may have risk for heart attack or stroke. But that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, is there a difference in the space between the intima layer of your artery wall and the medial layer, the muscle layer? That measures the amount of plaque, because that's where that LDL gets stuck. That's where that inflammation process happens. And that was what was greatly expanded in Tim Russert. Those little pimples were that stuff, that inflammation releasing back out into the bloodstream. That's what we want to know. And in fact, Asadul Islam, you bring up a really good point. The Doppler is basically a flow study based on what, the conversation that we just had, what I just said about it. Flow studies don't help very much. That's what a stress test is. They're looking to see if you have a flow problem. Like with a Doppler, you're not going to see problems until you get at least 50% occlusion of the flow. With a stress test, you're not going to see a problem on the stress test until you get 50% occlusion of the flow. 2/3 of heart attacks happen in people with less than 50% occlusion in the flow. So now do you wonder why people like Tim Russert had a totally normal stress test, didn't see any problems, and then turned around and had a heart attack and died? So Asadul Islam, if you want to have the quality of study that Tim Russert had and miss 2/3 of your risk, sure, go ahead and do that. But if you want to really get a better understanding of your risk, don't do a flow study. Don't depend on a stress test. Don't depend on a Doppler. Look a little bit deeper. So, Mark, thank you for your patience as I've gone into some of this technical stuff.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Doc.
And thank you so much again for telling us about your journey. You may not see yourself as a hero, but I do.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gilbert.